Welcome to Impact the World, a podcast from West Park Baptist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee. This is where we discuss topics related to how we can all love God, love people, and impact the world. Here's your host, Tara Hayes.
I'm your host, Tara Hayes, and I have two guests with me today, Pastor Joe Kappel. Hello, Joe.
Hello.
And Jake Bishop, self-declared co-host. If you listen to a couple episodes back, he signed the contract. The ink is now dry. I wanted to sit down with Jake and Joe today and just discuss Romans some more. We are still working through that now that we are, we've just been through Easter, the Easter season, and we are pretty far into the book of Romans. We're about halfway through at this point. So I thought it'd be a good time just to sit down and discuss anything that you guys had on your hearts or minds or questions.
Hey, I appreciate that. And, as we're thinking through this, maybe the people who are listening don't know, like in a week's time, all that goes into the preparation to walk the church family through the book of Romans for all of us who are on the preaching team. So I thought one of the things that we could kind of give a glimpse of here with Jake and I here is that weekly meeting that we have.
I think that's great.
On Wednesday afternoons to talk through the text for the preachers who are going into that weekend. And Jake and I and Pastor Sam are always in there, and we get the privilege of talking with each other and the men who serve on that preaching team. So we're going to give a glimpse just of like how we enter into that. Just thought as well, Jake, we could talk about some highlights of what stood out
What
to us.
have you guys thought about most theologically? No, I'm just
Pastor
kidding.
Sam just tells us what we're saying, isn't that right? I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
That's a joke for anyone listening.
No, he's very generous to share in the preaching schedule with us, but he does share his outlines mostly when he gets in there.
Yeah.
And we nod and affirm what he's saying, but we do have the liberty to go and to prepare these messages and preach.
Well,
as
the
we're
Holy
led.
Spirit gives each one something, so I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. So anyway, well, when we get into that, why don't we just begin with some of the highlights, and then we can go into like the review of some things that we have taken away from one another.
Yep.
So what are some things, Jake, that's really been impactful for you this time through in Romans?
Yeah, I think I've said this before, and maybe it's not a good thing to admit, but when we decided we were doing Romans, I wasn't that excited about it. Like a lot of people, that's like, Romans! Like, let's take 12 years and go through the whole book. And I was just like, Romans. I don't know. And I don't know why that was. But thinking back on it, I think this is wrong, like a wrong thing in me, is that there's a lot of Romans to me that just feels like it's the basics, right? It's just going back to the gospel. And I think, and that shows something wrong in me that felt like, oh, let's just, back to Romans. Like, okay, we're going to, but I think that's been an amazing thing walking through it, is to be reminded each week in such explicit terms, right, of this good news that we have as a Christian. A lot of the passages, there's never really a passage that's like, oh, that's new. I don't know that one, right? Like that kind of thing. But it is just being reminded of, wow, okay, this is an amazing book. And so for me, I just have to admit that at first I wasn't that excited. But as we've gotten into it, I think I needed it. And so,
That's funny because as you said that, I was excited about Romans, and like you said, it's not really anything I haven't heard. I mean, I've been a Christian for 45 years, and so it wasn't. But it's a fresh look and just an encouragement of the gospel and who God is, and the work that's been done to bring us to where we are in our Christian lives.
absolutely.
The last time I went through the book to teach it or preach it was almost 20 years ago. So when, we talked about doing it this time around, it was kind of a trip backwards in time as I was thinking through that time period. I had a pastor at that time who was probably about my age then, speaking to me, who was in my 20s, and saying he thought it was so funny that guys my age and that generation wanted to go through Romans. It was almost like we had a theological point to make, right? But he said, guys my age, we would teach through 1 Corinthians if we would start out, or something from Timothy's letters or something. But I thought, that I more or less had Romans figured out back then, but I've really grown to understand things more deeply this time through. And it's just to that point that, no matter how many times you go through the gospel is for everyone. There's that point. It's the A to Z of the Christian life. And Paul does that so well in organizing this letter to help us know the gospel. So that's been good for me.
Yep, that's good. And I will also say, just to add on, because it's fresh probably, but I recently preached a couple times through Romans 8, and the hype, it lives up to the hype. Romans 8, we, as part of our training program here, we're all memorizing the entirety of Romans 8. And so just along with that, in that process, along with, teaching through it, I shared when I preached it, I said, teaching Romans 8 is amazing. It's so, there's a reason I signed up for them, because those are the ones to, you want to teach. And at the same time, it was convicting to me, because it's how differently would I live if I truly believed and lived as if this was true, right? That nothing can separate me from Christ's love. That God is working all things for my good. And so there's just there is a sense in which I read Romans 8 and sometimes live, I think, as if it's too good to be true. So I think the Lord's been doing a work on my heart over the past couple weeks, just memorizing this, studying it for sermons. Of this is true. And I need to, I think part of my sanctification will be living more and more as if this is true. Because what do I have to be anxious about? What do I have to fear? Which are big, problems for me in my life. So that right there is worth everything. If I get nothing else, which I know I will, but if I get nothing else from the second half here, that'll be enough. So.
Yeah. And I would say, I didn't sign up for Romans 9 that I could remember. I think
because I get to assign the passages.
For that. Yeah.
So. I was going to say, let's talk about 9, 10, and 11.
And that's why I'm not doing much on those, but Joe's doing a lot. So
that's because Jake knows nothing about Israel. I mean, he's just
Israel? Yeah. Who's that?
Yeah. Although I didn't sign up for chapter 9, it was a really crucial passage for me to study through, because, like you have confessed to dealing with anxiety. I've dealt with fear of what if I'm not elect. I've had that kind of fear grip me before. And really, when you get into that trap, it's hard to get back out, especially if you're trying to reason your way out of it. Right. So that's why I was just so refreshed just to believe what the scripture says. And I can remember that Sunday, Pastor Sam and I preached that message. It was refreshing to see the way the church family responded. It's not easy for any of us to understand the difficulties of a doctrine like the election of God, right. God's choice, and our human responsibility in light of that. It seems like these things don't match up quite well. Yeah. But I think I've been edified by the response of the church family as well, where we really do foster here and have a church family that is eager for the scriptures to speak what they say, just that they say what they say. Right. And we say what the scriptures say and allow the scriptures to speak to us. Yeah. So it's really, we're not going to get ourselves into traps if we just preach the Bible. And there will be things that are hard to understand, as is the case, like Peter said that about some of Paul's writings. They're hard to understand, but they are edifying and they point us to God. Yeah. So it did kind of feel like going from the warm tropics to get an icy blast at the North Pole,
from 8 to 9. Yeah. Yeah. But it is kind of jarring.
Yeah. When I preached, I said it's kind of like that, that blast does allow you to see things a little bit more clearly at times. Sometimes when the cloud cover that keeps you warm goes up, you can see the stars a bit more clearly. Yeah. And I think that's true as you get into some of those harder doctrines. Yeah. So
I was impressed that you all undertook the entirety of 9 in one message.
Yeah, that was fun.
Because I feel like there's so much there. I mean, you could preach probably for weeks and weeks on 9. You'd be bogged down maybe a little bit.
I think people would get weary.
Yeah.
But I know what you mean.
There's a lot in 9.
I mean, there's a reason pastors have taken 10 years, 15 years, 20 years to go through Romans. You could,
You
right?
could.
I mean, I think our what we're hoping for is that we want people of West Park to get more of a broad range of.
Yeah. Oh, I think the timing has been excellent.
So we don't want to spend 10 years in one book. There's nothing wrong with that, but
no.
So when you're trying to get to other things and get, you have to do a lot in 1 week.
Yeah,
but and I didn't have to do a lot in 1 week, but Joe did.
You
Pastor
listened.
Sam did.
You listened.
I listened. Listening was it? Yeah,
it was tough. No, it was. I there's nothing wrong with doing it in 1 week. I was just like, wow, that's. But I mean, it was handled well by both.
Tara, what stood out to you? Just some things that have jumped out to you from all these chapters in Romans we've studied.
Well, I appreciate just the reminder of the sovereignty of God, and really that that is again from chapter 9. Like you said, I think sometimes it's hard for us to reconcile that God makes a choice and that we have responsibility. And I have to be reminded that it's okay for God to not choose someone else. We live in such a culture that everything needs to be fair, or what we think is as of fair. And in the auditorium, Pastor Sam made the point very clearly, you do not want God to be fair, because if God is fair, then we are all going to hell. But I think just a good reminder that the sovereignty of God can be scary in that point, that he will exact his judgment, but the sovereignty of God is also comforting. And I see that in these passages, that that he calls us and he has a plan for us, and that he doesn't just leave us.
So, Jake, as we think back on our meetings that we have weekly, how has that helped you to grow in terms of your preaching, and what kind of things, are you also giving out during that time, just so that those listening can understand what goes into the preparation? Yeah,
so the process there is, we meet Wednesday afternoons, so that gives us a couple days to really get into the passage. And so typically it's at that point, we're all varying degrees of done at that point, right? But we have an idea of where we're going at least. And so we come together, and I think the best thing for me is we're all very different. Age-wise, we kind of, range from, 60s to 40s to 30s, so that helps, just even adding that, and then Colin 20s. And so that helps just to add those different points of view. But also even in just our personalities and preaching styles and things like that. So that really is helpful, because if I'm alone, I'm going to do it a certain way. But there's never been a time where I come in on Wednesday, even if have studied the passage at that point for hours. I never come in and don't leave with something like, I didn't even think about that. Or typically what's you ask a question and I'm like, I didn't even realize that was confusing. But yeah, it is. Like, why? I didn't even answer that. But other people are probably wondering about that. And so that's been just really helpful for me. I don't know, hopefully I contribute something to that, but I can only speak for what I've gained. And it's just to see it, that we're all seeing it from different angles. So I think with the team teaching approach, that's been so helpful just to know. And there is it's helpful even, I think, to go up and preach on Sundays knowing I've talked through this with people I trust, and they haven't
shot me down.
They haven't, there's no heresy from what they've seen, but we're all on the same page. We know that we're going to go up and not contradict each other. And that really is helpful, I think, as we go up to preach the word. So.
Yeah, and that requires trust of one another. Yep. We're not in the locations where we can only be in one place at a time. We can't be at the other place to listen and be edified there. But that Wednesday meeting for me is a great time to check in, to learn, because for sure, like you said, there are things that are brought up that I had just not thought of. And by Wednesday, I'm usually stuck somewhere in the text where I've not really been able to push through and to think through exactly how to explain and illustrate and apply. So I really am thankful for that time. Sometimes I go in, I'm not quite as ready as I am at other times. And so I'm fearful that I'm going to walk out of there with somebody else's outline. But I think the way we've structured it, I mentioned Pastor Sam will sometimes read his outlines. So what we do benefit from is his years of experience. I think he's probably preached through this, what was it, 20 years ago as well?
It's rare to find something he hasn't preached through at this point, right? That's the fruit of years and years and decades and decades of ministry.
And that's one of the greatest benefits of talking through these things with him. And then also, like when I talk with Jake just thinks of illustrations fairly frequently. And so that's an area of struggle for me in the formation of the sermon. Sometimes funny things might pop up to me while I'm preaching. Those are usually the things that I shouldn't say. But
like we're gonna buy you a diamond ring this last Sunday.
Recorded. It was not recorded when I preached that message from Romans 9, but I actually did promise to buy, these guys out looking to buy engagement rings that the church could somehow support them financially.
Hate that I missed that. I hate that I missed that.
I should have kept that one in.
The rest of the sermon was amazing and right on.
Thanks, Jake. Yeah. So, sometimes that benefit comes just by thinking through an illustration that one of the other pastors might share, or one of the ways that they apply it, which I just didn't think of. Yeah. So I'm just very thankful for that time.
Well, I know the church body, just as I talk to different people, are very thankful for the different pastors. Like Jake said, we have different ages, different stages, and different styles. And I often hear, well, all of our pastors I enjoy all of our pastors, and we're not trying to rate anybody or anything like that, and it's not even an enjoyment. It's like that the Lord shows me something through all of them. And I think that's beneficial to the church body as a whole to hear from different people. So,
but if you had to rate us, how would you? just kidding. Just kidding.
Sorry, you can put me on the spot to sing, but I'm not rating any preaching.
On the positive side, I've heard from people just what you shared, that they learned something from each of us who shares the word on a Sunday morning. And I've just come to view that as almost normal, but from what I hear, it's exceptional. You don't really have that testimony in churches where people are coming to us. And I'm not knocking other churches. I'm just saying God has blessed us. That's what I'm getting to. God has blessed us with men who can preach the word and who are being shaped into that ministry more and more.
Well, and we can't make light of the fact that it's because you all are seeking to preach the word faithfully. And as you do that, as you seek to rightly divide the word of truth, so to speak, he's going to bless that.
Yeah. So as we go forward, just some things to look out for. Romans 12, if you are feeling marginalized in this culture today and wondering how to relate to people positioning themselves against you as enemies, Romans 12 has answers for you.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's going forward. So Romans breaks up the first 11 chapters this is probably an overgeneralization, but tend to be theological, it's all theological, but very theological, these amazing truths, kind of ending with that last little bit of 11 where he goes in, Paul just can't help but worship, right? Oh, the depths of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments, how inscrutable his ways. And then he pivots a little bit in Romans 12. And so we have it timed out where our summer series this summer will be Romans 12 and on. And I think you'll notice it gets a lot more practical about how to, it's been practical at this point, but how to live the Christian life. And so there's a lot in there that I'm excited to really get into. So it's going to be good.
We're talking about, the spiritual gifts, how to love enemies, how to submit to human authorities.
Christian community.
Conscience issues, how to love people who differ from you. So we're getting down to the nitty gritty.
Yeah. Some questions will come up that, like female deacons is one. Like there's things like that we can't help, but we have to talk about because it's coming up. So I think it's going to be good. So
I'm running for deacon. I am not. Just kidding.
You could be the deaconess of singing, I guess. I'll
just stick to being in the choir.
We better say we don't have women deacons. But you're just saying that it's in the text.
It's
that
a
we have,
conversation.
we have to be confronted with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're going to be, that'll come up here at the end of the summer.
Okay.
Wow.
All right. Are we ending on that note? I mean, that's
I don't know. You have anything else? That's the end of Romans. So
that is, yeah. No, I would just say I am thankful, for the ministry that I have with brothers in Christ who are here to mutually edify me as we seek to edify the body and build it up through the truth of Scripture. Romans is a great book, so continue in it. It wouldn't hurt us to continue reading it over and over again in our personal reading, and talking through it as groups, making it a part of our daily life.
Yeah, I will say it has produced some interesting conversations in my community group.
That's good.
So it's been really good. Well, I appreciate you all taking the time to join me today. And maybe we'll sit down and talk about more of Romans in the future. I don't know, maybe we'll get Jake to talk about chapter 16 when we get there.
I'm in.
Just kidding.
I'm in.
No, but I appreciate this, and I do appreciate the time and the effort that the pastors are putting into this book, because I do think it is an important one. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tara. Good to be with you today.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Impact the World. To find out more about West Park Baptist Church in Knoxville, Tennessee, visit westparkbaptist.org.